the best way to make change in your community is really to run for the condo board or the homeowners association board. And the reason for that is there's really a wide range of interpretation of the declaration and its documents. So if one person can look at the same sentence and see that the shade of gray is very dark gray, and another person can look at that sentence and see a very light gray, then you want to be the one interpreting so that you can make the positive change that you want in your homeowners association.
Had enough of excessive fines, selective enforcement, and nosy Karens? Welcome to the Association Nightmares podcast. If you're tired of being pushed around by your HOA or condo association, you've come to the right place. Property owners, get ready to take back your power. And now, here are your hosts, Ann and Mark.
Today we have an attorney on the podcast, Jane Muir. She's a business litigator and managing shareholder of J. Muir Associates PA, based in Coral Gables, Florida. She's a recognized super lawyer from 2021 to 2024 and was a rising star prior to that from 2014 to 2019. She specializes in complex commercial litigation, business transactions, and general counsel services. Jane is admitted to practice in Florida, as well as the U.S. District Courts in the Southern, Middle, and Northern Districts of Florida, and the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the 10th and 11th Circuits. She holds an AV preeminent rating from Martindale-Hubbell, indicating the highest level of professional experience. Jane Muir is bilingual and endlessly passionate about serving her community, whether as a board member, participating in philanthropic initiatives, or taking care of local businesses in their time of need. And Jane is here to join us today. So Jane, thanks so much for joining us. Yeah. We've got a really interesting podcast ahead of us. Jane, I had just shared your bio a moment ago. Can you kind of go into a little bit more of like, what kind of an attorney are you, and why did you choose the practice area that you chose?
Sure. I'm a business litigator, and how I got into that area was, first of all, I was on the mock trial team at University of Miami, and I was the student leader of that group. So I loved doing advocacy. I started doing debate when I was young, and I've always really enjoyed performance and debate. And so I really wanted to do something that involved a lot of speech and presentation. Business litigation, I opened my firm originally in 2010, and I was just starting out as a lawyer. And at that time, I would do any kind of work anybody needed. And I even did traffic tickets from time to time. I just talked to a friend who reminded me that I helped him avoid the consequences of a pretty serious traffic infraction when he was a young motorcycle rider. So I just sort of did what people needed me to do. And over time, because of the neighborhood I was in, I was in the Edgewater neighborhood, which is just east of Wynwood. Wynwood was a hotbed of startup activity, and the combination of the art community and a lot of people wanting to bring in fresh ideas and young energy to that neighborhood, they had a lot of startup companies and co-working spaces and things like that. So by virtue of my location, I would get calls because I was one of the early adopters of Yelp. I was one of the first lawyers on Yelp in Miami. And when Siri first came out, if you asked Siri, find me a lawyer, Siri would look at Yelp and see who was closest in proximity to you that had good reviews. And from all those, small matters that I'd handled, my friends had written reviews for me when I did a good job. I would be the answer. Siri would say, J. Muir. So I ended up getting all of these kind of startup companies, and I had started my own firm. So I'd learned how to get the correct permits and licenses and done a lot of research on that, which made me perfectly situated to help people with that situation.
That's great.
Yeah, You've done some work with associations, and since we specialize with common interest communities, the last time we spoke, your very strong recommendation was that if you move into a common interest community, that you should definitely get on the board. So could you address that and tell us why you think people should become more active, and how do you think they can do that best?
I've determined from my experience now, having been in this world just a few years, is that the best way to make change in your community is really to run for the condo board or the homeowners association board. And the reason for that is there's really a wide range of interpretation of the declaration and its documents.
Hmm.
So if one person can look at the same sentence and see that the shade of gray is very dark gray, and another person can look at that sentence and see a very light gray, then you want to be the one interpreting so that you can make the positive change that you want in your homeowners association. And
Okay.
for instance, the 2/3 vote off, many associations amended their declarations to reduce the number of votes that they needed of the membership to make alterations to their declaration. And that is a very common change because leadership will decide, oh, it's just so difficult to change the declaration. The declaration's so restrictive. So everybody's getting along right now. We all agree that this needs to be changed. So let's change it so that we only need 51% to make a modification. And sometimes that's bad because a later group of leaders will get involved and maybe their interests are not consistent with what would be best for the association. And now they only need 51%. So that's how a lot of, tremendous changes that might be detrimental to a minority group end up getting passed. But it is legally permissible. As to your question about talking to a lawyer, definitely there is so much that you learn from experience and from seeing a lot of different scenarios that a layperson just won't be able to learn. Like you can be a smart person. Like we have a condominium that we represent where there's one guy who's very smart. He's an engineer, and his background and culture is German, and they're a very particular type of um, cultural background. They're very meticulous in general. And he reads the declaration, he reads the statutes, and he does not understand what they say, even though he's so smart,
Hmm.
because he doesn't recognize how they're interpreted in the common usage and in courts. And
Right.
so he'll read something that he thinks proves his point, but like 3 paragraphs above, there will be something else that completely changes the interpretation that he can't understand because law is just a unique language that we have to learn. And an English speaker, a native English speaker who is a smart writer and reader, and you can be uh, reading every Grisham novel there is, and
Right.
if you take a look at these documents, it's like a foreign language.
Yeah.
Well, let's tell our listeners that the governing documents are actually done by the developers, correct? They're the ones
Right.
that draw this up. And you told us that you've read thousands of them
Oh
and
yeah.
that many of them have really not changed in the last 40 or 50 years. It's almost like there's a standard, correct?
Right.
Um, okay. And the difficulty that we have, what we don't like, is the fact that the governing documents are really designed to give advantage to the developer and to the municipality. And it really leaves out the property owners, the membership of the not-for-profit corporation. So the question that we really have is, and we did discuss it, we know that that there are new statutes every year that are, put out by the Florida legislature. Uh, uh, Enforcement is very tough. So you had recommended that perhaps the best way to make changes in governance is through the governing documents. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Well, there really are 4 avenues to make change in your association. The most desirable avenue is get elected to the board because it gives you the most latitude. It gives you the most resources because as a board member, you get to have a vote and a persuasive voice in deciding what the budget of the association will be and what actions that it will take, the policies that they'll implement under their rules. Sometimes boards will choose intentionally to ignore rules or selectively enforce, which is very undesirable. We don't like that. That's fundamentally unfair, right?
Yes.
So the easiest way is get on the board and then get your friends on the board. And it's a tax on your time and your energy for sure to serve. But if you want to see change, it requires effort and it requires time. It requires diplomacy. Like people have a hard time when they're passionate about their homes, being calm and patient and learning what the lay of the land is, what the personalities are. Some people are motivated by different things. So you have to figure out what motivates a person so that you can understand them and communicate in a way that will help them agree with you, and come to the same conclusion you've come to, but maybe for a different reason. So getting elected, number one. Number two would be doing some ballot initiative like a recall, which is another way to get elected, basically. It's just a little bit more of a challenge because your ballots have to be perfect. You have to go around getting signatures. They're only good for so long. And so that's pretty much the same as getting elected, but it's a second route. A third route would be a ballot initiative, like getting an amendment passed. Usually you need to be on the board to get that done. So, but that is an option. And then fourth is probably a lawsuit, which we really don't advise in our firm. And the reason is there is a concept called the business judgment rule, in which courts are reluctant to second guess the people who have been elected to office to make decisions on behalf of a greater body, like an association. And the reason the courts are reluctant to do that is they feel that the members of that governing group know more detail and have more context. And so they must have good business reasoning for why they chose to do something or another. And that's a reasonable thing to think. The problem is, my estimation is in human nature, we have a bell curve of all different traits, right? So we've got a bell curve of height, weight, intelligence. It doesn't matter what the trait is, there's a curve. And to me, the curves that matter in the context of association are morality and attention to detail. So low morality people, they think, well, why shouldn't I hire my cousin and he make a profit off of this job painting the association property? I got this position and it's my right to have the ability to help my friends gain something from it. And they will help me when they get some opportunity like this too. And that's just how business is. And that's kind of true to an extent. Sometimes you can get a better deal from a friend than you can from a stranger. But at the same time, we've got to have a meritocracy, right? And we want to have enough bids to know that the brother or the cousin who is the painting contractor is making a bid that is consistent with what the market would pay. So that morality curve is important because the high morality people would say, oh no, I couldn't even vote on a question that would benefit myself or my friends or family or business associates. I would abstain. I wouldn't participate. That's really improper. And that's high morality. And, people have even forgotten that that's a thing.
Yeah.
In Florida, we're kind of the capital of all types of fraud, Medicare fraud, mortgage fraud. And in a lot of other places in the world, it is totally normal to have that patrimonial relationship where if you have a position of authority, you give your friends opportunities. But in North America, we've sort of tried to avoid that, and lately it's been less of a obvious thing. Like Florida in the 70s, we had some ethics legislation that was passed. For instance, legislators weren't allowed to vote on any topic that they were in professionally.
Hmm.
So the famous legislator Dick Pettigrew was a commercial litigator at Schutz and Bowen, and he had to leave the firm and begin practicing family law so that
Wow.
he could participate in the legislation that was being passed in those days, like the Sunshine Law and the single subject rule and all these excellent structures that we have in place in Florida to avoid corruption. But in any case, there's that morality curve, and that guides a lot of people's decisions when they're acting in a board setting. And then
Well, that was 50 years ago.
what was
And
that?
that was 50 years ago was what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And you're right, there has been a demoralization of ethics in this country. And I think what's happened is that all the stories that we're hearing in the press about board members taking money and doing all kinds of things it shows that there's a lot of corruption within the system. And unfortunately, the property owners are on the hook for that stuff.
But people simply don't know. They don't know
Yes.
they're not
Right.
supposed to vote on something that they could benefit from. They just don't. And the
Yeah.
Florida legislature has changed that rule. And so
What?
even the state is not paying close attention to this kind of thing. So
Wow.
the attention to detail one is another interesting and important curve to consider, because people with high attention to detail will read their declaration carefully. They'll look at every single letter, and they're the ones raising their hand in meetings saying, no, we can't do that. Article 3, Section 6, subsection D says we can't do that. And the other people who are lower on the attention to detail curve, they'll be like, ah, Jane, why do you have to be such a buzzkill? We can do that. Here we are. We're all voting. It's all democratic. Like, let's just do it. Nobody's going to say anything. Like, let's just not worry about those details.
Yeah.
But the detail type, which I tend to be more on the high detail end, is like, no, it's just a matter of honor and duty to like follow those details. And if we don't like it, we must then change it and follow the details that are required to change it.
Well, the boards have a fiduciary duty to the membership. And
Right.
that fiduciary duty should imply ethics because they're really acting as agents. And they really should not be acting on their own, which they do most of the time.
Well, a lot of people don't even know what that means. So fiduciary duty is the duty of utmost loyalty, care, and prudence.
Mhm.
And what that means is that when you're serving as a fiduciary, a lawyer is a fiduciary. So I keep your secrets safe. I keep your documents safe. I try to protect you from any avoidable risk. I try to make sure you're complying with the law. And the same duty I owe to my client is the duty that a board member owes to the membership. That's a critical point, and people just don't realize that level of care that's required. And loyalty, what does that mean? That means I have to be faithful to what you want and what you need and what's best for you. And care, that means attention to detail, right? And prudence means good judgment. So I I tend to be on the higher end of that attention to detail morality spectrum, because I'm also kind of a student of history and I'm curious about how things used to be and why things are how they are now. And so I think of, well, some calamity happened 100 years ago that led to the rules being how they are. I want to know why that happened. So going back to your point, Anne, about the declaration favoring the developer, if you imagine yourself being a developer, it will make a lot more sense. Because, Anne, imagine you own 100-acre parcel of land
Mhm.
and you are going to build 1,000 houses on the 100-acre parcel. And so first thing you've got to do is you've got to hire a lawyer to carve up the parcel into little pieces. And by the way, this is what my grandfather did for Miami Beach. He was the
Oh,
guy who
really?
carved up Miami Beach.
Mm.
So first you got to carve it up. And then when you're carving it up, you want to set restrictions on how each parcel can be used because you want it to fit into your neighborhood plan. You're going to have a school here and a road there and a place for a grocery store. So you've got to make sure this little neighborhood is going to have a good flow. And while you're building it, you don't want the people who bought parcels pre-construction to start dictating how you're going to do things, do you? No, this is your project, you're running it, and so you want total control. And
Mhm.
that's why the declarations always give the developer such control. But what happens later is the developer hands off the control to the association, and oftentimes that right that they retained disappears altogether. So, this is one of those little factoids that lawyers would know because of having read so many declarations that it's not the developer doesn't necessarily retain rights against the owners. It's more that during the project they retain rights. Now, there is one exception I can think of off the top of my head that is very interesting,
Hmm.
which is the Grove. Let's see, what is this island called? There's a little island off of Coconut Grove. I think it's called Grove Key. And the developer retained the rights to develop all the common areas. And so after building it 50 years later, all these people lost their waterfront view because the developer finally got the financing or the desire to build a new
Hey,
tower
Rice.
wrapping around
Wow.
the key. And everybody was really upset about it
Oh,
because
my
they had
goodness.
this kind of park-like wrap around walking area with little beaches and picnic areas. And it was very cute. And now there's just a tower, like a semicircle wrapping around these existing towers.
That's criminal. That is really good. It's like
But
selling
you know
seaside
what?
property twice.
Selling
But that's
seaside property twice. And but he left it in there. And
right.
if you're the developer, it was your land. You owned that whole island, right, Anne? And
Right.
you developed what you could, but you knew that there was more space you could put stuff in. So you just retain that right for yourself. And the problem is that there are all these landmines buried in declarations that people
Yes.
don't read before they buy the condo.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, they're also written, they're very complicated. So if most people, even if they read them, don't understand them, as you said.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
And if
the
they're talking
industry
about hundreds of
insiders,
pages, you
yeah,
mentioned
yeah,
Jane, 400 pages. I mean, for most people, just to get through that, let alone to be able to retain it, would be really challenging. And if it is legalese, it's hard for the layman to understand. So it kind of puts the average buyer at a disadvantage that
major disadvantage.
they're just like, you know what, I'll just sign it, right?
Well, it's kind of the concept in Latin, buyer beware, caveat emptor.
Sure, correct.
That is an ancient principle of law that we all have heard and know. And I kind of think of condos, it's kind of like a game of musical chairs,
Hmm.
where if you're lucky, you buy in early, you enjoy it while the maintenance is good.
Oh, that's
And then
correct.
you want to get out before they start assessing and demanding high maintenance. And unless you are on the board, and then you can be the watchdog and make sure that the maintenance has been done over time, little by little, as opposed to one big thing.
Yeah.
I want you to know I see cases where I suspect that the property managers are intentionally allowing the property to fall into disrepair
I've heard
because
that
Yeah.
multiple times. Yes.
they
And
want.
why do they do that? Explain that, please.
I think there's several motivations for that approach. One would be that they earn a fee for managing construction. Some property management contracts I've seen have a 15% fee for any construction at all. So if they allow, let's say, the swimming pool to fall into disrepair and it gets cracked, instead of draining it every year or two and resurfacing the interior and making sure the stucco is intact and making sure the pump is working little by little, where it's $1,000 or so, they just wait until the whole thing has crumbled into disrepair. And then they're like, well, we need a new pool, and that's going to be $200,000. And then they get a portion of that fee as a fee for themselves.
And that's legal? Is
it-
that legal in Florida?
It is legal in the sense that how can you prove that it was an intentional act?
Mhm.
It's a negligent act, certainly, because a reasonably prudent person in the same situation would not let the pool fall into disrepair over time. They would repair it little by little. But these standards of care are subject to interpretation and subject to business judgment. So what people will say to defend that is, well, we couldn't afford to fix the pool because we had to pay for other things. The roofs were leaking. We had to fix the roofs. And without raising the fees, we couldn't do both. And so the pool is a luxury as opposed to the roof, which is a necessity. And so we just couldn't do it. And that's how it happened. So we kicked the can down the road, and now it's time to deal with it.
So and
you made a
reverse incentive because they're able to get the 15% kicker legally if it's a major construction project, but not if it's maintenance.
Right.
You made a very important point, which is, and I had lived in Florida once before, and when I moved into my first condo, it was fairly new. It was a couple of years old, so the maintenance was virtually non-existent. But now what's happening in Florida with the SB4D rule is the fact that, these buildings need major overhaul, major maintenance and rebuilding, and the costs have become totally prohibitive. So I've seen this. It's almost as if as these associations age out, they become money traps. So maybe people shouldn't buy into an aging community, but into new ones if they can, or into something else.
That's definitely an option for the individual. But if you're already in there, then like I have an association I represent where we did a poll of all the membership to inquire whether the members would be amenable to a buyout of the entire association by a developer. And so in that situation, rather than come out of pocket to fix, the owners decided they'd rather be purchased out of their risk. Which is a viable option. Now, it's not as fun when it's a hostile takeover. Like sometimes developers will spot an association that is sort of falling into disrepair and the expenses are getting too high, and they'll just start gobbling up units until they have a voting block, and then they just bully the others out.
Yes.
Which is not desirable. I think it's a much better business practice to have a friendly takeover than a hostile takeover.
Sure.
But, people don't always agree with that. And also some people just can't be pleased. So like the new rule in the Florida law allows a condo to be terminated even if there's 10% that disagree. It used to be it had to be unanimous, but now they allow for dissenters, and the condo can still be terminated, which is unfortunate because if you're the one holding on, like 90-year-old man bought his condo with his wife who died, and now this is his last memories of her, and he doesn't want to let it go, and the rest of the condo is turned over and the people want to terminate, and he won't get out. Like I've seen them turn off the water and power.
Yes.
And, do
We've
that.
heard that too.
But
so what do you need as far as percentages to dissolve a corporation in Florida?
Any corporation, it
No, I'm
depends.
talking about the associations.
An association, if I'm not mistaken, it's 90%. And I could get you that exactly.
Okay, I think I had heard, I may be wrong because you're the expert. I had heard that condos require 100% but the statute is now 80% for HOAs. I'm not sure if that's correct. But you said that there's
Must approve the termination plan and no more than 5% can object.
So it's 95%.
Right.
so it's 95%.
Or it's tricky because this is one of those things where a lawyer's understanding
Correct.
might be helpful.
Correct.
5%, less than 5% can object.
Okay.
80% have to approve. So that leaves
Mhm.
a margin for people who like partly agree, like they agree with terminating, but they don't agree with the plan, or they abstain from voting for some reason.
So 80% can terminate an association. Is that for condos and HOAs or both?
That is for condos. It looks like HOAs too. It looks like 80%.
Okay.
But
So that's
I'm not actually an expert. Only board certified lawyers are allowed to call themselves experts.
okay.
But I focus on that practice area.
Okay. It's very interesting because that's happening more and more because of the cost of repairs and maintenance in Florida. And unfortunately, we have spoken to people who have had hostile takeovers in their associations,
Fighting
and they've been
for
in
a decade
litigation.
plus. Yes.
Yeah, 13 years in litigation. I mean, it's, I have to give them the credit, but it's heartbreaking. It's cost prohibitive and heartbreaking.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. The Association Nightmares podcast is brought to you by the U.S. Coalition for Association Reform. USCFAR is committed to changing how associations are governed by shifting the balance of power to better safeguard and advance the rights of individual property owners. The best way to stand up for your property rights is to become a member of USCFAR. Visit us at www.uscfar.com now.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this question. So the developer, puts the documents together, the governing documents, and then hands it over to the association. But let's say the associations are not run well. And as far as I'm concerned, I feel that the boards have too much power. And it would be nice to balance that power, giving the membership more say in how things are done. I think that's fair. And it would probably resolve things more internally than having to go to litigation. And I do agree with you. Don't go to litigation if you don't have to. So what can membership do once they have these governing documents? I know you said you have to be on the board to make the changes.
Being on the board is the best way to make change. It's the easiest way. It's the membership. It's like representative democracy. The people of America have the right to vote, but we delegate our decision-making authority to our congressman.
Correct.
And your board is your congress of your association. So there are certain categories of actions that the declaration requires a member vote for. If you wanted to make a permanent change to your declaration, what you would do is seek to amend the declaration to require a member vote for certain classes of modifications.
Correct.
So that the board could the board could change the color, like it could be a pink building and they could paint it blue, but they couldn't add a new awning, or they couldn't change the garden paths, let's say, or you'd have to review some other language in other declarations to find good ideas and put together a list of the kinds of things that you think a member vote should be taken for.
I think having membership vote on more things would keep the boards in check. And as much as we would hope that, yeah.
And do you realize most votes are less than 10% turnout?
Yes. But things have changed. I mean, now there's electronic voting. People can vote on their phones.
It's still terrible. It's still terrible. Like, for instance, I've been elected to office in an organization with 3,000 members, ranging between 3,000 and 5,000 members. And I had a contested election. and there were only 300 votes.
Mm.
And another contested election by kind of people who weren't active in the group in the first place. So I was kind of the incumbent establishment candidate, popular, active, lots of committee experience. And somebody ran against me who was not really active or experienced. And there were only 700 votes. People just don't turn out to vote.
Hmm.
So an interested member like yourself should get on the board, because then you get to be the one deciding if the color is going to be pink or blue. You just can't leave it up to other people if their judgment is not good.
Well, at this point, I don't think I would be voted on the board because I sued my association. But maybe in the future, we'll see what happens.
I think
Jane has a cookie strategy, though.
I
That's
do.
right.
I do.
You want to tell us about your cookie strategy?
Sure. So, fun fact about me is in college, I was very active in politics. I was a membership chair for a political party college group, and I recruited 1,800 voters to this group.
Wow.
And my strategy was learned from a program that I took that taught you intentional practices to get elected. And it's just like the bell curve, there's a curve of interest. And the top 10% are like watching C-SPAN and writing notes and reading the proposed bills in Congress and reading the Office of Management and Budget reports every year. But most people are kind of in the middle. They kind of pay attention to politics. They know a little bit here and there, but they're not watching how each senator and each congressman votes on each issue and like trying to figure out, okay, who do I like or anything like that. That is an extraordinary level of interest. So if you look at the country, out of 100% population, only 60% are eligible to vote, 30% actually vote, and 10% vote Republican every time, and 10% vote Democrat every time. And you could be like the best candidate in the world, and they will never vote for you because they're in the other party. So you're always focusing on the middle 10. Those are the people that will get you elected in the country. So in your association, there aren't political parties, of course, but there are different
Cliques.
cliques, right? There's your pickleball clique, and there's your garden clique, and there's your water ballet or water aerobics clique, right? And so you go to the cliques, and step one is to make friends, because when somebody likes you, trusts you, thinks you're a straight shooter, then they'll probably say yes when you ask them to vote. But if you don't ask them, they will not know. And so rule number one is ask first. And so you go around as soon as you're thinking of running for the board, you get the list of all the members of the association, which you're entitled to by law. You're allowed to get their address and kind of think through your mind and ask your friends, do you know this person, Anne? What is Anne like? Is Anne into, does she have a dog? Does she love going to the dog park? Or, something that is your particular interest in your home and your homeowners association. So you figure out who are the voters, what they care about, and then you go make friends with them and talk to them and say, hi, I'm Anne, and I'm interested to serve on the board. Is there anything that you want to see in our association that I can help deliver? And then the people will say, oh, yes, well, I really think we should have no restrictions on the time when we can bring our dogs to the dog park. And right now, the dog park closes at 8 p.m. And my dog needs to go out again before bed because he's old and incontinent. And so if I can't take the dog to the dog park, then my dog pees in the house and it's a real problem for me. And then you're like, okay, that seems reasonable. I could probably get the board to extend the hours of operation for the dog park. Okay, great. And then you've got one vote, and you just keep going down the list and asking every person, will you vote for me? Once they say they'll vote for you, don't talk anymore. Like sometimes people don't care and they don't want to know. So you have to kind of like measure how interested is this person? Maybe they'll just say, sure, I'll vote for you. And if they don't want to talk further, be like, thanks so much. Have a nice day. And that's it. But it's all about like being friendly, having given something like bake somebody a pie, make them a casserole, bring them cookies, like the cookie discussion. I mean, I really like baking cookies. I have one of those KitchenAid mixers, and so I can whip them up in no time.
Yeah.
Um, so whenever somebody's giving me a hard time, I'm a cookie baker because I do have a hammer behind my back that I will take out and bash with, but I don't want to lead with that, you know? You gotta
Right. No, you never leave with the hammer.
you gotta lead with the generous,
Cookies.
kind,
Right. Right.
attitude. And there's some people they'll never like you. So you just let those go. Those
Right.
are just not gonna like you and they're gone for good. Focus on who does like you and remind them and stay in touch and keep them advised of your progress. Say, I put it on the agenda this Friday. So do me a favor and show up so that you can come and participate in the discussion and see that I'm doing what I said I would do for you. And if you know anybody else that wants the dog park open later, bring them too. And then you get something done, and people are like, wow, Anne really, she delivered on that commitment. And I appreciate that. And I know from now on, if I have an issue at our association, I can go to Anne and she will have a reasonable approach to fixing it. And she can get people on board and she can move the dialogue in the direction where we want to go. And she understands how people think. Got to have her in our leadership group. That's how you do it. And so you got to ask, you've got to maintain the contact. And then the other thing is it takes a lot of patience because once you're there, everybody's going to bend your ear at every minute of the day. You'll be in the gym, doing your, workout, and people are like, by the way, Anne, I thought we really should get some new machines in here. And you're like, I'm in my personal space right now. This is my mental health time, right? I'm pumping iron. And I don't really want to be chatting about what the declaration says and what the committee's going to do and da da da. So you have to be sort of nice and patient, be like, oh, what a great point. Can we talk about this over coffee tomorrow? Because I'm in the middle of my workout. And if I chat with you, the workout will take longer and I'll forget how many reps I've done. And I just really, now's not the best time for me. Is that cool with you? And they'll be like, oh, okay. But people don't think about that at all. And just imagine yourself if you were in Congress and you had like a major budget to do. Like people will be coming up to you everywhere you go. You could hardly go out to dinner. And someone's going to be like, oh, please fund my busing, schedule, or I don't know what, but literally the United States is one big condo association. And that's just what we do here. We delegate our power as citizens to a group of people who we hope will make good decisions for us, and chips fall where they may.
Okay, so let's take the other side of the coin, which is, okay, you have a board of directors and they're not doing the job that you think they should be doing. And you don't feel they're representing your best interests. I know you touched on it a little bit before, but what recourse do we have when we have someone who is breaking regulations, breaking the law, maybe involved in criminal activity? What recourse do we have as non-board members?
Okay, so you're a non-board member. Let's say people are cheating in the election. This is my least favorite problem because it is so difficult to prove.
Yes.
And the information you need to prove the crime is in the hands of the bad guys.
Mm.
And you can't even get it to the point
Correct.
you need to get it so that you can report them to the authorities. That is just the worst possible situation. So for one, I frequently work with a consultant. It's called South Florida Property Owners Consultants. I think that they've been on your show.
Yeah, Tamara Reyes, she's wonderful.
Mara Reyes, I adore her. She is just as good
Yeah.
as can be.
Yeah.
Retired police detective, forensic detective. She was in charge of the forensic division of Miami-Dade Police. And so I often work with them, and sometimes people come to me with suspicion, and I'll send them to her first. Or she will talk to people, and she works with a lot of different lawyers. But
Mhm.
once in a while, I'll be the one that receives her call, and then we'll have a good report to start with, because the devil is in the details, and where you can find the corruption is in the money. Like, follow the money. Checks written out to reimbursement or to cash.
Mhm.
Um, Cash disbursements from ATMs I've seen. Just, if you can see where the money's being spent, that'll help. It's harder to find corruption when it comes to like votes and reading the minutes. You'd have to park at every board meeting and like take detailed notes and remember like like, was there a motion? Was it seconded? Was it voted? And do the minutes match what happened? But it's so difficult because, as I mentioned, the bias of the business judgment rule is in favor of these people. And
Mhm.
so even if you have the proof, that there's a tremendous bias to overcome in favor of the board. So what you have to do is explain to the people who care, like, get your list of members, talk to them and say, here's my concern. I'm suspicious because I've seen A, B, and C. And I would really appreciate if we could withdraw this person from the board, and will you sign this recall? So we want to
Mhm.
recall the bad guys. Once you're on the board, then you can get access to the information that you need to prove the wrongdoing. But really, from the outside, it is borderline impossible to
Right.
prove. And like, I have experience with matters where we're pretty convinced people have been receiving kickbacks, and there are signs like somebody bought a new car, or
Yes.
um
They're on vacation a lot.
suddenly, yeah, they're suddenly wearing a really expensive watch, or uh different, designer clothes, things like that, where you're like, wait a second, this person, 5 minutes ago, they were sort of shopping in the bargain basement bin. And
Mhm.
now all of a sudden they're dripping in diamonds. What is the deal with that? Like,
They're
there's
doing
some,
work in their condo or their HO or their home. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, that's another great telltale sign. Somebody's own unit is getting decked out to the nines, and they're working with the same contractor that works with the rest of the building.
Yeah. The problem is when you're on the outside, you may have a suspicion, as you said, but you can't prove it. And just one thing, you were talking about a recall. Just because you put in a recall for a board member, that doesn't put you on the board.
No, but you can replace the board member with yourself.
Really?
Yeah, because let me see if I can pull up a recall ballot for you. So here's a sample written recall ballot.
Okay.
And what you have to do is write in the association's name precisely without any typos, and then identify the board members that are problematic. And
Okay.
sometimes it's not all of them, sometimes it's just one or two.
Mhm.
And say who you want to take out or retain,
Mhm.
and then who you want to replace them with.
Okay.
Okay, so then, like, let's say we want to replace board member Mark with board member Ann.
Mhm.
Get the person's printed name. Now, the unit owner's name has to be exactly right. It has to be if it's a corporation, if it's a trust, if it's something like that. If it says Ann Hirsch, but the unit is actually owned by Ann Hirsch LLC, that will be incorrect, and the ballot will be thrown out. So you really want to have a lawyer prepare these for you. And then you get the signature. So you need to count up the number of units total. And this even tells you what the Florida statute is. So let's pull that up.
And with a recall, is there also a need to be at 80%, or what's
No,
what's
you
the
just need 50% plus one.
Oh, all right.
So if there are 300 units, then you need
Mhm.
151 ballots to recall someone.
Mhm.
So let's see.
I think the DBPR gives procedure as to how to do it. I think you need like 10%, then you have a meeting. But if you get the required votes, you can basically skip that step, correct?
I don't know what you mean. If you get what required votes?
Well, I think the DBPR has a formula as to how to do it. You're supposed to get like 10% or 20% of signatures, and then it's supposed to be some kind of a meeting. But if you get 150, let's say 151, 150 plus one, and you've already got,
50% plus one is what
yeah.
Jane was
But
just. Mhm.
so what I'm saying is, once you go out and you get that, I'm assuming you can sidestep that meeting because then you have the count
No,
that you
the
need.
meeting happens anyway. And
It
just know
does.
that the
Okay.
DBPR's procedures are based on the statute.
Okay.
So if there's, statutes are written by people, so they're not perfect either. But
No,
if
we know that.
the most precise thing is going to be the statute. So
Yeah.
the DBPR does its best to interpret and guide lay people about how
Okay.
to walk through the statute.
Mhm.
But it's better if you sit there and read it out loud to yourself and say, what does this mean? Like,
Mhm.
how do I really do this? So
Yeah.
this is let's see, 718.112 subsection. Let's see what subsection. It's so hard to read the tiny little print and the numbers are
Yeah.
what.
It's very complicated. Laws.
This looks like subsection 3J. Recall of board members. Subject to section 718.301. So we got to put a pin in that. I'm going to open that in a new tab. Any member of the Board of Administration, meaning the Board of Directors, may
Mhm.
be recalled and removed from office with or without cause by the vote or agreement in writing by a majority of all voting interests. That's the 50% plus one majority.
Right.
A special meeting of the unit owners to recall a member of or members of the Board of Administration may be called by 10% of the voting interests, giving notice of the meeting as required for a meeting of the unit owners. And the notice shall state the purpose of the meeting. Okay, what does that mean? We can call a recall meeting with 10%. So
Correct.
that means, like, if you have 300 members, then 30 members, right? Well, 300.
Yes.
30
Yeah,
members?
that's 10,
Okay.
30 members, correct?
30 members can call the meeting. They can make a notice. They can say, we're hosting a recall meeting. And that's where, imagine you want 151 people to come into the room and
Mhm.
vote no confidence.
Mhm.
But it's really hard to get people into a room. And it's really hard to get 150 people into a room. So it's a lot easier to get them to sign something
Right.
and be like, all right, I'll sign your thing, as opposed to have them show up at 7 p.m. on a Thursday night when they're trying to make dinner and they're walking their dogs and their kids are looking at their homework. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's why you probably want to go with this recall option.
Mhm.
But when the
But you still,
recall,
yeah.
yeah, the recall still requires a board meeting, and the board will evaluate these ballots and say, is this a perfect ballot? And if it's not, it gets thrown out.
Mhm.
For example, I represent a board that a group tried to recall the board a couple times,
Hmm.
and
Wow.
they made errors in their ballots. And so it didn't work. And that's that. So it's like, when people don't do a precise job, even if they may have like a group that is a large group that agree with them, you'll lose. And then the association has a lawyer, and the lawyer has to interpret the law fairly and precisely. And so
Yeah.
that's how it is.
Very frustrating. Very frustrating system.
It's It requires attention to detail, and it requires effort, and it requires
Yeah.
like understanding. So it's frustrating if you expect it to be simple. Things just aren't simple.
And earlier, Jane, you mentioned that there's some kind of time frame around this. So what is that time frame around a recall?
From the time someone signs the ballot to recall a board member or group, the ballot has to be used within a fixed period of time. It might be 120 days,
Okay.
but there
Right.
is a deadline where that piece of paper gets stale.
Hmm.
And if it was signed too long ago, you can't use it anymore. So you have to be hoofing it to all your members and like getting all the signatures within a short period of time. You can't like do it like slowly, little by little. It's got to be organized and fast so that and it makes sense because people change their minds,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. It does make sense.
If let's say, for instance, like in a recall situation I'm dealing with, there's a group of people who disagree with a board decision that was made based on like legal requirements. And the unit owners do not want the board to follow the law.
Mm.
And the board, knowing the details, they're like, we have to do this. It's just what the law requires. And so since we have to, let's do it in a way that gets us a little bit more benefit. And so they expanded services provided by this contracting party. And what the board is hoping for is that over time, the contracting party will do such a good job that the unit owners will be like, oh, maybe we overreacted about this. And maybe it's okay. And that way there won't be so much conflict. But at the beginning, it's like when you've had a long-term situation where prior leadership ignored the law, and all of a sudden your board is being strict, people don't like that. They don't like rapid change. They want things to stay how they are. They want more freedom and flexibility. And sometimes the law doesn't allow that, like a condo hotel, for instance, is an example where under the city code, condo hotels have certain duties to guests, right? They have to have a desk. They've got to check people in. They've got to know who came and went. They've got to maintain housekeeping so that there are no bed bugs. They've got to run, like they have health code requirements. They have tax requirements because they're getting resort fees that go to the city. There are all these hotel specific compliance needs. So if you're a hotel condominium where people own and like rent out through the hotel, then your unit owners have all those same duties of the city code and the health code. And if you go a long time not having to do those things because nobody's enforcing it, and then all of a sudden somebody does, it's challenging to
Shock to the system, I would imagine.
exactly.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. Show up at your next association meeting wearing a t-shirt from ftheboard.com. F the Board has great-looking limited edition t-shirts, hats, and mugs that spur conversation and let you express exactly how you feel while supporting the property rights revolution. Visit ftheboard.com today.
We talked a little bit earlier about amending governing documents. So if it wasn't for a recall purpose, if it's an amendment purpose, my recollection of what you had said is it's about 2/3. But how would somebody who's not on the board go about, campaigning for an amendment?
Okay, let me look. So that really is going to be dependent on your bylaws and your declaration. So each situation is going to have its own nuance. But in general, you have to propose an amendment and the board has to approve it. Once the board approves it, then it would go to the membership to be voted by the percentage of members that are willing to amend.
So somebody might have 65% or 70% of support already, and they bring the amendment to the board. The board could say, nah, we don't like that amendment.
Correct. But if you have 65% of the vote, then you can probably get yourself on the board and your friends.
What about voting mechanisms? So you talked about the low turnout, and we know that there's low turnout in U.S. presidential elections and local elections and midterms. And certainly in condo associations and HOAs, there's low turnout. But aren't there ways that we can make turnout easier? So, for instance, like we don't have necessarily a polling place at the HOA, but the people who show up at the HOA meeting would be able to vote. How about are there online or apps that condos and HOAs use to take votes?
Absolutely. And there are dozens of them, and I couldn't even count how many options there are. I personally prefer if I'm advising someone who's trying to take over their association, I prefer paper. And we helped a unit owner take over his association. And what we did was we had them harvest the ballots. So every unit owner gets their ballot, and we gather them up and turn them in for the voter. And that is allowed, even though a lot of people think it's not, or your own HOA board may object to your doing it, but it is perfectly allowed. You can't vote for someone, you can't sign for them, but you can harvest their ballot.
As in knock on the door with some cookies. Hey, did you fill out that ballot?
Exactly. So, and you can bring like the thing about paper ballots in an HOA election, you have to know how an HOA election is conducted from the administration side. So how we do it is first we get all the, like we open the ballot box, and in my condo associations, the ballot box is a big, strong box that's like screwed together because we don't want anyone accusing us of opening the box too early. Like we have them destroy the box after it's done. But that's something I do to convey reliability of the box, you know? Other people will have a clear plastic box with a little teeny lock, you know, that you could pick with a paper clip if you tried. But whatever happens, you have a box. You take out the ballot, you check the return address against the list of unit owners you have to make sure nobody entered two ballots.
Okay.
Right? So your first check is, does everybody have one ballot per unit? Okay. Then you have to open the envelope, and there's a second interior envelope that's blank. So how we do this is we have a canvassing committee. Usually the law requires 3 people chosen at random from the audience to be the canvassing committee, and they're the ones counting the votes. So I'll pick whoever in the audience looks like a nice, reliable person. In this election, we had a lady who was a comptroller for a public school, an accountant. So those were people who had good counting skills, for lack of a better word, you know, like counting is a practice skill. If you're counting cash, it's easy to lose track of your numbers. It's like, where was I? What was the score of the game last night? I forgot. So first you open the exterior. Once you've confirmed one ballot per unit, you save those exterior envelopes, and they have to be saved for like 120 days. Then there's a second group of envelopes. They're the blank interior envelopes that's designed to make sure your ballot's secret. Those get opened and also saved because you want to make sure that the same number of blank envelopes are as the same number of the written on envelopes, right? So you save those. Finally, you get the stack of ballots, and the 3 people on the canvassing committee, the first one takes the ballot and they tick mark, or however they want to record how many votes went for each candidate. And they hand it to the second person. That person marks off how many votes for each candidate. Then the third person, and then it goes into a stack. These are the counted votes. And they go from counter to counter to counter. And then once all of the votes have been counted, we rubber band them and we put them aside. So now we have a stack of envelopes that has the exterior written on envelope, the interior blank envelope, and now the ballots, all saved, rubber banded, organized. So then the people go and they count up how many hatch marks they got for each candidate. And let's say they have, 200 for this person and 100 for that person and 50 for this person, whatever it is, all three people have to match their counts. So if one person has a different count, we have to go back, pick up the pile, and do it again. This is why voting meetings take so long, because depending on how many units you have, it may be like 1,000 ballots.
Yeah.
And people,
Yeah.
they have to think like, how many did I get for this person? Anyway, so once all three people are in agreement, they all tell the administrator of the election, which might be me or the property manager, but usually it's the lawyer who does it because it's technical. Then we look at if they're online ballots to collect in addition. So then we'll add up the number of online ballots to the number of paper ballots, and that's how we get the final quote, the final count. And we'll read off the people in alphabetical order who were elected to the board are A, B, C, D, and E. And that's that. Now, if there was a coup, like we've had people cheer. I have I could show you a video of my people cheering. They were so excited. And they were like chanting, "Sí se puede, sí se puede," which is Spanish for yes, we can. So, but if there's a group that was ousted, I always think it's important to be kind to them and thank them because they did put in time and service and they probably did the best that they could under the circumstances, what they know, their personal experience. So you always want to thank them and give them a round of applause because they may get elected the next election. And this is your community. So you have to build bridges with people, even if you've had to stomp on them.
Yeah.
Like beat them and then bring them a plate of cookies and say, I really appreciate that and that you served. And if there's anything you need, please let me know. And I want you to know I consider you a friend and neighbor and like smooth things out.
You had mentioned that if you could, that you would like to see the elections overseen by the government, by this. How do you see that? Because I'm not quite sure how that would be done.
Okay, the number one problem I have when it comes to representing minority interests in condominiums and HOAs is election tampering because it's practically unprovable and it can like a board can just keep getting elected and you're like, how can this be? Like, how are
Yes.
these people getting elected? They're doing a terrible job. Like, we're having to pay assessments in the six figures every year. How can
Yeah.
this be? I hate it, right? So if I were going to make any recommendation for a change in government policy, it would be that the state should create its own voting tool. And that should be a supervised state thing. Because, Florida, we learned an important lesson in the 2000 election
Bush v. Gore, yeah.
with the
Hanging
butterfly
chads.
ballot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And every county has both parties. I've been on the ballot integrity team for my party for 15 years, and both parties have it. And we have lawyers that are looking at specific ballot issues, like the signatures don't match, or the bubbles not fully filled in, or multiple bubbles filled in, all kinds of like super nitpicky details like that. And both parties are monitoring the polls, making sure everything is clean and proper. And then there's a whole host of ordinary, nice people like yourself who are volunteering. I mean, they get paid something, but every election cycle, they go and they work at the library and they welcome people and they make sure that our democracy runs properly. And we're so lucky because other countries, like poor Venezuela, they can't have faith in the vote. So our corrupt associations, I think, would have a lot less of a easy time,
Stronghold.
right, of a stronghold. What a good word. Exactly. They would not have such a stronghold if the elections were certainly fair. And
Mhm.
you can have an ombudsman come and oversee your elections, but all they're watching is the paper vote. They can't see the electronic vote. So there's so many ways an electronic vote can be manipulated. I could get the logins and vote for you, and you'd
Mm.
never know I was voting for you. Or you just don't log in. You don't even know someone's voting for you because since only 10% vote, then all you need is another 10% who don't vote, and you cast the vote for them in there, and you've got it, you've rigged the election.
So you're saying there are associations that are using electronic voting for boards?
Oh yeah. There
Okay.
are lots of associations using electronic voting. Are
We
is
know that, but for the boards, you're saying?
to elect board members, yeah. Do you do you not
We
not
have we have paper. We have paper.
paper? Yeah. I think paper is better because you'd have to go to extreme lengths to stuff a ballot box with fake votes. But on the computer, it's easy. It like people are so vulnerable to hacking. Like I could just
Yeah.
sneak onto your Wi-Fi and get your information and submit your votes for you. Or if you're in cahoots with the property manager, and a lot of boards will get into cahoots with their property manager because they're uh, all benefiting from the role, and the property
Right.
manager doesn't want to get fired, and so they want to keep this
Right.
board. So if they're in cahoots, the property manager could just like switch votes. Like you voted nay to put in hurricane windows, but they just switched it to yay.
Hmm.
And that like that it's rampant. So if the state would make its own voting system, that would maybe like have an impartial third party, reliable third party, making sure the votes are legitimate. Because that's the one thing that it's like hard to prove and keeps corruption allowed being allowed.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. Property owners, the best way to stand up for your rights is to become a member of USCFAR. Visit us at www.uscfar.com now.
Well, since you're an attorney, I'm sure you can certainly write statute, correct? You can propose statute.
Yes, and I'm so proud to tell you that I'm on the task force for condo fraud in Miami-Dade County, because I'm a past president of the Miami-Dade Bar, and we're working on a condo mediation program that we plan to offer so that people who are having difficulties with their condos can get information and also hopefully resolve their conflict. The other thing is provide information. The Miami-Dade Bar has a lawyer referral service, which is affiliated with the Florida Bar Lawyer Referral Service. So if you're looking for a lawyer, you call the Florida Bar, and it turns out you need someone in Miami-Dade County. Miami-Dade Bar is the entity that's advising you on who you could work with. And for a fee of $50, you get 2 attorney consultations. One with the first attorney, it's 30 minutes. And if you don't like that opinion, you can get a second opinion. That's not including their fees, but it's just for a consultation. That's a very reasonable price.
That's wonderful. Because I'm in Palm Beach County, and that's unheard of up here. So
Yes.
if someone wants that and they're not in Miami-Dade, how can they take advantage of that?
Try the Florida Bar Lawyer Referral Service, and I'll pull that number up.
That's very good to know.
It's 1-800-342-8011. So people who don't know any lawyers
Mhm.
or can't find somebody, that's a good choice to call, because at least you can get on the right track.
Or just ask Siri.
Ask Siri, yeah. Well, that doesn't work anymore. I think they're drawing their data from somewhere else, but I used to do it as a party trick. I'd be like, look at this. Hey Siri, find me a lawyer. And it was me. It was so cool. It was so cool. So
That's
I would say oh gosh, I kind of, where were we
We're
talking
talking
about?
about the group that you're part of, that you're
Oh,
spearheading in
okay,
Miami-Dade.
yes. Thank you so much. Sorry, I
It's okay.
got tracked there.
It
Um,
happens to me a lot.
so the task force, because Miami-Dade, we are ground zero for fraud, and condo fraud is a big one. We just had a bunch of arrests at Turnberry.
Yes.
There's this hammocks matter with millions of dollars in fraud, waste. Like the property manager
Yeah.
had a car purchased by the association. It's nightmarish stuff, and it
Wow.
took forever. Tamara was involved in both of those cases, by the way,
Mhm.
because it's just so difficult to prove, and there are murders and drug deals and other things that the police are focused on.
Right,
So
right.
digging through financial records is not necessarily high on the list.
Sure.
So,
And the
The police
problem
will
is,
say it's a civil matter, right?
yeah,
right,
yeah, and they
they
walk away.
love
Yeah,
saying that it's a civil matter.
yeah,
So
yeah.
the task force is the state attorney, Catherine Fernandez Rundle, one of our local state representatives, Vicky Lopez, who was recently reelected, Republican state representative. There's the Cuban American Bar Pro Bono Project and the police, Miami-Dade Police. They have a division for this, along with the
This is all
Miami-Dade
great
Bar.
information. Thank you for sharing this with us. It's very,
Of
very
course.
important.
So what we're doing is proposing legislation, and Vicky Lopez is working on what she's
Great.
calling Condo 4.0, which is another overhaul. I will say on the subject of these reserve studies and the reserve funds, um, individual members of associations are really upset by these new rules. But I have to say, I do think that they have a good point, and there are some options that can fill your reserve without demanding an assessment that's like a six-figure assessment. For instance, there's a lender called Y Green, and the lender, what they're doing is they're underwriting the reserves. So,
Mhm.
like hypothetically, Mark, you live in an HOA, and the reserve study reveals that you need a minimum structural reserve of $1 million,
Mhm.
and there are only 100 unit owners, so everybody's got to put in $100,000. Ouch! Pulling $100,000 out of your pocket is like a real painful
If
number.
you have it, if you
If
have
you
it.
if you have it. So what they do is they'll finance it, because maybe $100,000 at once is painful, but you could do it over 10 years. And
Mhm.
so Y Green will put in the money, and then you pay them little by little with an interest rate. So there are workable ways to get your reserves filled without having to have the giant assessments. The other thing is, imagine yourself being in the shoes of the board, and the Surfside thing is what inspired this rule. And
Right.
what would happen at Surfside is the board would say, we need to do structural repairs. And to do them, it's going to cost $50 million. And so we need to assess everybody, and it's going to cost every unit $200,000. And everybody got the news, I'm getting assessed $200,000, and they would vote out the board. The new board comes in, they're like, we need to do this, but we can't afford it, so we're just not going to say anything. And then they would get to keep their job because the unit owners wouldn't oust them because they were not trying to collect a big amount. The theory behind this reserve amount is that if you already have it in reserve, there won't be a political problem when you try to collect the money to do the work. It'll be already there, and so you can spend it right away. The other problem is a practical issue. Whenever somebody doesn't pay their assessments or their fees, what is the solution? Well, you get a letter, right? From a
Mhm.
lawyer like me. First letter says, pay your fees or else we're going to have to put a lien on your property. Then we have to wait 45 days. Second letter says, okay, we're putting a lien on your property. If you don't pay, we're going to have to foreclose. Wait another 45 days. You still get another chance. There's another letter. Please, please pay, or else we're going to have to foreclose. Finally, we file a lawsuit foreclosing on your property. You can tie up the foreclosure for like 2 years.
Hmm?
So that means if someone flatly refuses to put their $200,000 into that reserve study fund or the reserve fund, then your association is stuck waiting to pay for the cost they need to take on. So it's a problem, because if everybody like bands together and says, we're not going to pay this money, then it puts the whole association in a financial problem where they're having to collect and wait for the courts to get involved and all this while the building is crumbling down. So that's why they want to have some reserves. I think they might have gone a little overboard, but the realistic truth is every business is supposed to have at least 3 months operating cost in reserve, right? Like if you had a heart attack or got pregnant, or all of a sudden your biggest client left and you had no money coming in, the prudent business expectation is you have 3 months operating in reserve so that you can earn $0 and your company still runs.
Keeps going. Right.
Right. This is where my business experience comes in. In the nonprofit world, the expectation is 6 months reserve with no money coming in. So the reserves that are being mandated by the new law are like roof, structure, and general operating. And what they're trying to do is mandate what was prudent business practice, but has been ignored or forgotten. So maybe it's uncomfortable for people to have to do it all at once. But if they have good lawyers and good advisors, they can finance it. And so it's not so painful. And the truth is, it's better in the long run to have it there so that you can make the fix instead of put the board in the political crosshairs of getting ousted every time they try to fix the problem. And then the place comes crumbling down.
Well, that was a tragedy, the Champlain Towers. That was
Such a tragedy.
Yeah, it really was.
I knew
But
2 people in the building.
really,
Yeah.
sorry. So sorry about that. But on the other hand, there are people that came to Florida because Florida was an inexpensive place to live. They bought their condos or their HOAs and they were a good price. And the last couple of years, things have gone crazy.
A fixed cost, right? They viewed their
Yeah.
assessment, they don't expect these big bills, and now they're kind of forced out of their retirement home.
Yeah. So things have really flipped on their head. So it's a very complex issue and it impacts a lot of people.
It sure does.
Well, you are a wealth of information. I had no idea you were involved in all these other things, but if you do write legislation or you need our support, we're right there behind you. Be happy
Thank
to
you.
to support you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. I'm so glad.
Yeah. So if do you ever represent if you ever represent individual condo owners or homeowners who want to stand up to their board, or if somebody that's watching or listening to this is on an HOA board and they need legal help, how do they get a hold of you, Jane?
Sure. Well, you can visit our website, which is jmuirassociates.com, or an easier way to find it is miamibusiness.law. And we can be reached at 786-533-1100 by phone. We offer a 30-minute consultation for $250. And if it's on emergency basis or in person, the 30-minute consultation is $500. And we explain, what's going on and hear what you're dealing with and get you focused in the direction that you want to go in to achieve your goal. And my partner, Victoria Morton, is a licensed community association manager, along with being a lawyer. And she's been president of her HOA, and we've had a lot of great experience coming from her too. So we're happy to help anybody who needs legal support, either trying to stage a coup or running their association.
That's great.
Thank you, Jane. So that was a really great conversation with Jane. So if you are involved in your community association or want to get involved in your community association, Jane was talking about having some type of course on how to do these recalls, as well as how to get elected. And she shared a lot with us today. But certainly one thing that you could do, whether or not you get onto your HOA or condo board, you can become a member of the U.S. Coalition for Association Reform, where we fight together for your property rights. And there's a lot going on. Obviously, it's a very complicated area of law, but together we have a lot more power than when we're as individuals fighting the system. So we encourage you certainly to come and be a part of USC4. So in addition to that, we want to invite you to subscribe and like the podcast so that you hear about it the next time that it comes out. We've got some great guests lined up.
And if you have a personal story that you think our listeners would be interested in hearing, please go to our website, usc4.com, and please contact us and let us know a little bit about what you're dealing with. And if we can tell your story, we certainly will.
Absolutely. Be a part of the Association Nightmares podcast. It's for you.
Thanks for joining the Association Nightmare Podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you again soon.